a humble moment today, showing you the mess around me. But Kendall, how do you feel like humility kind of falls into accepting one another and or helping us love one another?
Man, when we get to these verses, these are gut punch verses all over the place. And I think part of the thing is I always tell people, in my mind, the root of all sin is selfishness. And people want to debate that about all different kinds of things, but I think it's the beginning where we think of ourselves more importantly, better, above anything else. We want what's best for us. We want what's even to the point where people reject God for years because they feel like they got it. They can do it better on their own. And all of these verses basically say, put other people in front of yourself. And it's like, oh my gosh, that has to be learned. We literally are born thinking about ourselves and needing and wanting to take care of ourselves. So as far as accepting one another, it's one thing to treat people with equal care, like we talked about yesterday. It takes it to another level when we're supposed to be considering other people better than ourselves. We talked about it yesterday, where we don't want to provide equal care to people if we feel like they don't deserve it. Like, let alone considering them better than us if we feel like they don't deserve it. If we like compare life to life and we're like, I'm a better person than they are, or whatever we want to think, it's difficult.
Yep. Well, as I was doing research for these passages today, I just ran across a whole bunch. I didn't put any of these in here, but I just thought I would run down them really quick. If you want to know how God feels about pride and or selfishness, just hop yourself into Proverbs. So here we go. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, but in humility comes before honor. Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life. Let someone else praise you and not own your mouth, and not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips. He guides. Oh, then we get into the Psalms. So like that was just in Proverbs, and that was what, 5 or 6 verses.
Yeah.
We're not meant to be proud people. We are meant to be humble. And I think when we start to look at who Jesus was, when you really look at who Jesus was, he was not a proud man, but he was a very humble man. And that is who we are supposed to look like. So we're going to jump in here. We're going to start as we do every day. So we prayed. We're going to start reading. Remember, this is Phil's structure. Then he studies. Then he reflects. And we'll do a little bit of reflection together. But I would encourage you to take time sometime today to go back and think about, what did we talk about? What were some of those application points? If you're a journaler, journal on that. You can continue to pray, but let this not be the only time you're reflecting on what we talked about today. Go back and read the passages again. It's just such good stuff, and it's good for us. And then as a reminder, tonight is our online class at 8 p.m. Dustin and I are going to be back here on the online Facebook page, looking at how did Jesus accept others. So Kendall, will you read Philippians 2:3-4? We're going to kick it off just kind of light and easy.
Exactly. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others.
All right. So when we're thinking about humility, what is the most difficult part of this passage?
I think it's that definition of humility right there. counting others more significant than yourselves.
Yeah.
Like taking the back seat to somebody else. It is, I mean, I just constantly like realize how much this is when you meet humble people, somebody taught them that, right? It is not a natural thing. And I just I just see that in my kids over and over and over again. You know, my family has a Yukon XL, a Suburban, and it is the biggest car on the road. And we fight every time we get in the car about who has to sit in the back seat. Every single time. I'm like, we drive the largest car on the road. I cannot believe we're having this fight every single time. But that's how we are. We want what's best for us, and we don't give a rip about anybody else. So I mean, it's super challenging and I mean, not just kids, adults too,
right?
Yeah.
I think too, when he kicks it off with that selfish ambition, like that is our go-to,
right?
We're always thinking about ourselves and what we want, and like you said, what's best for us, and making sure that our desires are met or that our preferences are in place. And when we put somebody ahead of ourselves, we almost feel like we're jilting ourselves. And oftentimes I would say that it's not done in true humility, but almost just to pacify the situation to move on.
Sure.
Like, I still really want to sit in the front seat, but whatever, I guess we just have to get somewhere so you can sit there. But then you're pouting in the back.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah.
What does this look like? And I would love for other people to chime in too. What does this look like in our day-to-day lives outside of the situation that Kendall referenced with kids and cars? But what does this look like at work? What does this look like in relationships? What does this look like in marriages? I know for me, oftentimes I know what's good for my husband, but I also know what I want.
Yeah.
And so it's this constant wrestle of, am I going to put him first in this situation? Am I going to graciously allow him what he needs here? Or am I going to hold on selfishly to what I want because it's what I want?
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right.
Andy Stanley says that in marriage, and I think it applies to other places, marriage is a constant race to the back of the line.
Ooh.
And think about that in marriage, in work, in, you know, anything. I mean, like, oof, that's a challenger.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Constant race to the back of the line.
Right.
My note here says this radical type of love is rare. For sure. Dom here says, this is hard because it is the center of the conflict between the old man and the new man. So our old self and our new self are before Jesus and are in Jesus. We go from a self-centered life to another person-centered life. Humility equals not thinking less of yourself, just thinking of yourself less. That's good. That's good.
That's good.
All right. And then Vicky says, on a daily basis, I feel like I am busy putting the kids first. I don't find the time to put the marriage first because I don't have the time.
Yeah.
I think women especially, but I think a lot of people feel that exact same way, trying to figure out, how do I make sure that my kids are cared for and know that they're loved, but also making sure that my marriage is a priority. That's a hard one.
Totally.
Romans. We've spent a lot of time in Romans 12, especially this last week. But today we're going to be in verses 3 through 5. And some of these may sound familiar. But again, all of these one another's work together, and they're all pointing us towards the way that we're loving. But starting in verse 3, it says, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think." So let me read that again. "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as one body, we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. So when we're looking at this, I feel like Paul is very clearly saying, you are not to think of yourself as something better than someone else, regardless of the situation. Here he's talking a lot about spiritual gifts, but I think in any situation, it matters to remember who we are. And I was thinking as I was pulling this together, I didn't put it in here, but I think it's Romans 5:8 where it says, we're all sinners who fall short of the glory of God. Is that that one, or it might be somewhere else? But in Romans, Paul says that we're all sinners. We all fall short. We all need Jesus. And I think when we remember who we are in that context, it can help us when we're trying to humble ourselves before another, to remember that we're just like them. We're not better than they are. In God's eyes, it's a completely equal playing field.
Yeah. And Paul, he says, for by the grace given to me, again, Paul is this, if anyone has any reason to brag, it's me. I'm the Pharisee of all Pharisees. I was persecuting Christians. I was, his resume is top notch. And he says, I'm going to speak to you, not out of my resume, but out of the grace that God has given me. Don't think of yourself higher than you ought to. Like, probably saying, that's what I used to do. I thought of myself so much higher than I ought to. And then I think the end of that verse, according to the measure of faith that God has assigned, those of us who have been following Jesus longer, those of us who have been in this, like, we should be doing this better than other people. Yeah. We should be the examples of this. Let's just skip over that one. That was a tough one this morning.
But it's going to lead us into, I think, this First Peter passage really well, too, with what you just said. But Carrie, thank you so much. I can never remember if it's 5 or 3. So what I quoted was from Romans 3:23. But Susie asks a good question here. Is faith something that God assigns or something that we develop? What do you think?
I think I think that's kind of a twofold thing, that God gives us faith, but then we build it, we develop it, we continue to, manifest that in our lives. One of the things, Lisa, that we're going to talk about in just a few weeks here at church is, like, how do we cultivate the soil of our lives? What does that look like? And part of that is the development of that faith that has been given to us by God. So
yeah. I was reminded yesterday, I was listening to something and they were talking about how our salvation is this gift, and that's that gift that's available to everyone. But our faith is believing in what we can't see. And so, like Kendall was saying, that is something that we are developing and honing and cultivating over time. The way that we are continuing to read and study and apply what we're reading in our Bibles, the way that we are treating other people, the way that we are engaging in our relationship with Jesus. Those are all parts of our faith. And I would say too, though, that's what people see in us. Yeah. And so as they're watching us live in this life, they're watching the manifestations of our faith, of what we believe.
That's good.
That's good. Okay. So Vicky here, the past used to make me feel uncomfortable, and I couldn't figure out why, because I don't usually think highly of myself, but really that didn't mean I was thinking of others higher than myself. One thing that shocked me about humility is that it doesn't mean thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Yeah. Just like Dom said, so good. It's not this putting yourself down. That's not what Paul is saying to do here. It's just remembering to put others first.
So good.
See, I think money has a lot to do with not being able to get away from selfish ambition, because that is the center of life for so many. I would say in our culture today, especially,
Yeah.
we tend to view others' worth based on the amount of money that we perceive they have. Let's see, Crystal. Yep. 12:16 goes further to say, live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. For sure. All right. Carol dropped a prayer request in there, so I'm sure that Crystal is putting that down in our prayer request. And then Jeanette, I've heard it said, put yourself on the shelf. There you go.
I think that's put the elf on the shelf, Jeanette. But no, that's a different thing. Never mind. That's totally different.
Yeah. But I do think that's interesting. Now, I will say, don't self-deprecate.
Sure.
Be very, very careful there, and don't become a martyr. Don't have that martyr mentality of, well, I can't because, make sure that you do take care of yourself, but make sure that you are not doing it to the detriment of those around you. Yeah. All right. So let's jump then into 1 Peter 5. Again, 1 Peter was one of Jesus's disciples. And it's really interesting if you want to do a little study here with Peter at the very, very end of maybe John. Jesus has this interaction with Peter, and he's asking him 3 times, do you love me? And Peter had denied Jesus 3 times when he was arrested, denied knowing him. And so 3 times Jesus is asking, do you love me? And each time Peter's like, you know that I love you. You know that I love you. And every time Jesus responds with something about sheep. So taking care of his sheep, feeding his sheep. And so here we see Peter, and we don't know what he was doing, but I wonder if he was reflecting on that moment that he had with Jesus when Jesus was reminding him that he was to shepherd and really take care of the followers that were going to follow Jesus. And so here Peter is writing, and he's saying, so I exhort the elders among you, and elders was a term that was just used to really talk about the spiritual leadership of the church. And my note here actually says that even Peter as an apostle would have been considered an elder. And they were also called shepherds. So elder and shepherds, and there was one other word, overseers. All 3 of those can kind of be used interchangeably. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd, Jesus, appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And he even goes on to say, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. So what can we learn here from Peter and the way that he is reminding the church leadership and the church membership to interact with one another?
Yeah, I think this is a major. This is one of those verses that gives us a lot of insight into how churches and how followers of Jesus are supposed to work. It basically says that as the elders among you, as all the people that are in your flock, like continue to shepherd, continue to help people see what it means and what it looks like to follow Jesus. And those of you that are farther out in front, you're the ones that are supposed to look back and bring those people along. You're the ones that are supposed to help those people figure out what it means and what it looks like to follow Jesus. If you're younger, pay attention to those elders, those people that are out in front of you. Listen to them, be mentored by them, all of those things.
Right.
And then and then it kind of wraps that whole instruction with, but with humility towards one another. Elders, don't come down on younger people. Like, don't dominate, like you just highlight, not domineering over them. Younger people, don't think of yourselves higher than you ought to when you're younger. All of those things, they're all kind of wrapped into this little chunk right here.
Yep. And I think it's so good. Oftentimes I have been the recipient of someone in a position of power that was all of these things. He was using his power to compel people to do things instead of allowing us to willingly want to be a part of something. There was shame that was spoken from the stage, very clearly directed towards certain people. And there was this dominance that was just kind of being flouted over individuals. And it was hard. It was really hard to be able to say, man, I want to follow you. I feel like you are shepherding well. But what does it look like when our elders and when our pastors are compelling you in a way where it's through encouragement, which we're actually going to talk about next week. But they're modeling this humility where you're like, man, you're doing this and I want to follow you into that. You're doing this not to gain anything for yourself, but because you love Jesus so much and you care about us so much. You are such a great example to us because of the way that you are humble. And I love that, he's talking directly to elders here. And then Peter talks directly to younger church members, but he ends it with all of you, regardless of who you are. If you are just starting out in your faith, or if you have been following Jesus for your whole life, if you are a young person or if you are an older person, it doesn't matter. All of us should be engaging with humility towards one another. Yeah. I love, again, he's equalizing that playing field.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right, though. If you've ever had that mentor that is a super humble person, the super like encouraging, oh my goodness, the way that person can make you feel and challenge you in a loving way and in an encouraging way, it's unbelievable. I mean, those are the things you remember those people as much as you remember the ones that came, or if not more than, that came at you from a negative way of doing that.
Yeah, it's good.
I also think the last words there, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I don't really ever want to sit in opposition of God. You know what I mean? Like that, when you read a statement like that, it's like, oh, like that's basically like, if this is a problem, man, get it right as soon as possible, because we don't want to live with God opposing us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and in that first Proverbs verse that I read, it's Proverbs 3:34. It says, "He, God, mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed." Like, I also don't want to be mocked by God.
Right. Exactly. No.
It doesn't feel
right. Feels wrong.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So Kendall, I'm curious what you think about Peggy's question here. If we view ourselves based on our current culture, where is God? And if you don't have an answer, I have thoughts.
No, yeah, go ahead.
So I've talked about it before. I've talked about this book With, and I don't know if I told you about it, Kendall. It's by a guy named Skye Jethani, but he writes about these 4 different postures that we come to God with. It's an over, under, and then it's a for, and then a from posture. And when we view ourselves based on our current culture as number one, as the only one that matters, really as kind of, I would say, the sun with everything else moving around us, that is really a over God posture, where essentially all we needed God to do was to wind us up and let us go. instead of remembering that we are actually meant to abide in and to be connected to God at all times, and that we are here to serve him by the way that we serve others. So I would say when we view ourselves in the way that our culture wants us to view ourselves, we're living over God where he doesn't really have a place in our hearts.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
I think that's just a loaded question too. In view of our current culture, where is God? I mean, that's a question people are asking. I think, like, in comparison to us, yeah, I think that the problems in our culture are coming because people have put themselves over God. He is not the leader and the shepherd and the guide of their lives. So the two reflect each other.
Yes.
When people look and go, well, where's God in the middle of all this? Well, we put him in the back seat. We tucked him behind the door over there.
Right.
We'll break him out now that things are a total mess, but that's how we got to our total mess.
Yeah. It's almost like, in Friends where Monica's got her closet where she just shoves everything that she doesn't want to look at.
Yes.
It's almost like we've just put God in the Monica closet and we're like, hey, we'll pull you out when we need you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's good. Sarah here says, this is, she said, so grateful that amongst it all, I've never had to go through that. She's talking to Carol. So we'll come back to that. Carol. Okay. So Vicky here says, this discussion while also reading boundaries can be a bit of a head spin. Such a balance, but I do feel it is about priorities and helping those that truly need it, while also caring for yourself without thinking less of them because they need the help. You were blessed to be in the right spot to help them at that time. I think that's so true. And just remembering who we are and who other people are. And again, I mean, there was a reason we talked about image of God before we jumped into one another's, because it matters so much that when we are looking at someone else, that we are remembering that they are an image bearer of God.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay. I'm going to read Dom's comment here. When you see people abusing authority, it comes from when people in authority start listening and ingesting the hype from others. Even when you have a title or authority, you're the same person you were the day before. You just have a title. It is true that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. I think Dom is the one who told me you're not actually leading if nobody is following you. And so, just because you have a title doesn't necessarily mean that you're leading.
Right.
All right. I want to make sure we have enough time to jump into this passage in Luke. So as we go into what Jesus is going to say, he's setting up a parable, which are these stories that he would tell. And oftentimes what Jesus would do is he would use ideas and moments that would have been super familiar to the people that he was speaking to. And so in this parable, his target audience is who was invited to this dinner that we're going to talk about. So Kendall, will you read this and then we'll talk about it?
Yeah, love to. Now he told a parable to those who were invited. When he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you will come and say to you, give your place to this person. Then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
So it's at a wedding. And so there would have been a very clear system of where people would sit based on their status. And Jesus, again, as he does, he's flipping this idea and he's saying, just because you think you deserve to sit in that seat of honor doesn't mean that that's actually where you should be sitting or where you should assume that you will be. And so what he's saying is, even if you think that's where you should be, remember that maybe someone else is meant to sit in that seat. And so you should take a seat further back, a lower seat, a lowlier place at the wedding. But then you wait for your host to say, what are you doing way back here? You should come and sit up here. And this has happened. I've seen it happen at weddings where someone either sits in the front row or, in one of those front rows, and then someone has to go to them and say, I'm so sorry, you can't sit here. This is saved for whoever, family, close friends.
Right.
And they're very angry usually about it because they wanted to be up front and they felt like they deserved to be there. And I've also seen where someone's sitting in the back and someone has to go to them and say, what are you doing way back here? Like, we've saved a seat for you up front. So I think when you think about it like that, it still happens today.
Right.
And we still don't remember and we still don't think about it.
Right.
I love here what he's saying is, this is a note. It is better to be humble than humiliated.
If you're not humble, sometimes humility is forced upon you.
Yes.
Right? Oh,
yes.
Man.
I didn't like reading that, but it's true.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Well, no, as years ago, it's probably been 10, 12 years ago, the first time I was in Africa at the Villages of Hope in Zambia, we went to a church service in a neighboring village. And when we got there, we were like treated as guests of honor. We sat in the front row. They wanted us to be, who we'd like for you to share, something. And so it was the senior pastor, the worship pastor, myself, the just dumb youth pastor, and then the other youth pastor. And they're like, oh, sir, please sit on the aisle here. And so I was given the seat of honor, and they're like, would you be willing to share during our service? And I was like, what in the world is going on? Well, the person with the biggest beard has the most wisdom in town. And so I was assumed to be that. And I was like, maybe our senior pastor should address your congregation, not me.
Not me.
But no, they insisted. I sat on the aisle. I had to speak to the congregation. It was a little bit awkward, but super funny. Like this, it was because of my beard. I was given that level of honor, which was kind of funny. But I think the thing that hits me in this passage, and throughout these passages, that I think we have to be careful of a little bit is we can fall into a trap of knowing we're supposed to be humble, taking that seat in the back row, and if we're not asked to move up, being okay that we're in the back row. Like, humility sometimes comes about when we're like, I know this is what I should do. I'm going to go sit back here. I hope someone notices my humility. We take pride in the fact that we're being humble. Yep. And that there's sometimes where you have to fake it till you make it in these cases. But when we truly can get to a place in our hearts where we assume the place of humility strictly from the desire from a place of humility, I think, man, that's a thin line to walk. And I don't think it's wrong to do something that is right, even if you're doing it for wrong motivation sometimes. But when we truly get to that place, that's when those are the people that you see around you, and you're like, that is a truly humble person.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to that motivation of your heart.
Yeah.
Are you doing it to be noticed, or are you doing it because you just know it's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Dom here says abide, one of the most important words in the Bible, 1,000,000%. I believe in it so heartily that I got it tattooed on my arm, because it's just that constant reminder that disconnected from Jesus, I am selfish and prideful, and my motivations are impure, and I'm not able to care for others the way that I need to, or love others like I need to. Dom, reflecting on Peggy's question that she asked about where is God, we have turned him into vending machine God. I'll get you when I need you, and otherwise I'm good. Oh, and keep me from anything I think is bad, for sure.
It's good.
Let's see.
Can you pull up Jenny's there towards the end, that comment?
Yeah, I'm just getting there. Okay. She says, yes, it does. And I feel like I have seen this and felt it to some extent. I think being humble is often rewarded quietly and internally. You know, you are making a difference in doing the right thing. It gives a peace like nothing else can.
Yeah. When you're being humble out of the correct heart, that's always the result. Is just, I mean, it makes you feel good, but it also is the peace that goes along with it, not the angst of like, man, would someone notice how good I'm doing right now? You know, yeah,
right.
So good,
right. Jeanette agrees. I often feel proud of how humble I am until God reveals the depravity of my heart or in my heart. Yeah. And then Becky, do the right thing, assuming no one here is going to care or notice, but he always notices. For sure. I tell my kids that all the time.
Yeah.
but maybe I should start telling myself, hey, remember? Remember who's watching.
So good.
Yeah. Okay. So as you guys have already started dropping comments in for the questions that we're going to ask, but here we've got our questions. Crystal's been dropping them in. I've got them right here. So here are the questions. If you would just put a number beside them, it's easy for me then to go as I'm maneuvering through, and for Crystal too. But here are the questions. What are the differences between how our culture defines humility with one another and what we have read today? I didn't update these from yesterday, so pardon me. What do these verses give us into how God expects us to have humility with one another? What prevents us from having humility with one another? What sacrifices can you make to better have humility with and or towards one another? When we fail to have humility towards others, what does it reveal about our relationship with God? So you started dropping those in. I'm going to start at the bottom and move up as we go. Thank you, Crystal, for getting these in there. So, and then Dom's responding to Jenny, 1 billion %. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. So her comment that we just went through. So moving up. Okay, number 5. So when we fail to have humility, what does it reveal about our relationship with God? Sarah says that we are forgetting how much Christ has served and being humble even to death on the cross. When we're putting ourselves over God, especially. And we talked about it earlier this week too, that God takes it very personally, the way that we treat others. And so when we're not being humble towards other people, in essence, we're not being humble towards him.
For sure.
So just as much as that, Phil talks about the vertical relationship with God, our horizontal relationship with others affects that vertical relationship. Let's see. Question number 1 here. Cassie says, culture defines humility as giving it to only people who deserve it. We've talked about this before. God says humility towards all. And I have a feeling that being beaten to the point of not being recognized even as a person and then hanging naked on a cross was probably a very humble act that Jesus gave us as model. And he's not even asking us to do that. So I think remembering who Jesus was and how he modeled humility for us, and then what we can do out of that towards others.
Yeah, that's good.
Sarah here says, I had a pastor who was very well known around the world, but he always believed in lifting up others and opening the door. Sorry to jump over here, for others and other service activities, and always thanked his table servers in a restaurant. He was God's light bearer. He was one of the most humble yet joy-filled men that I've ever known. Went home to be with God a couple years ago. Yep. And I think that's a great example, Kendall, of what we were talking about in 1 Peter when we're looking at our pastors and our elders as an example of what it looks like to be humble towards others.
Yeah. So
Becky, for question 2, what do these verses give us into how God expects us to be humble towards others? I think that our current culture, being so self-serving, perpetuates haughty behavior, and those who are humble seem to get trampled on, especially if they don't have healthy boundaries. There's that B word again. Humbleness and humility in the me culture can be viewed as weakness. I also think that those who are humble can become worn down if they don't have people around them who are also humble.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Totally.
it does.
Totally.
Yep. And I think when it is happening around you, when you've surrounded yourself with people who are serving others, who are caring for others, who are humbling themselves before others, it is an encouragement for you as you also follow suit and do the same.
Well, and it's another one of those things where if you feel like you're the only person doing it, it just weighs on you that much heavier. You know, when you're doing things with like-minded people, when you're all in it together, it makes it so much easier than when you feel like you're walking through concrete on your own. You know.
Yeah.
It's good.
Oof. Sarah, to question 2, instead of yelling at someone on the streets, get a job, pray for them and encourage them, and if possible, help. Yeah, I mean, I think just remembering, this is one of the things when I was working, we started an organization called House of Light, and we were working with homeless shelters that were helping people find permanent housing. And we got to the point where we recognized that we were all about one bad decision away from being in that same place. And maybe not even a bad decision, one moment away from being in that place. Whether, I mean, a lot of these people were coming from domestic abuse situations. A lot of them were coming from medical bills that had just piled up that they couldn't pay. So it wasn't like, hey, I just don't want to have a job. It was very, very significant life circumstances that had led them to a place where they were homeless. And to keep in mind that at any moment that could be me or that could be my friends. It was a very humbling realization. And it helped us as we were doing the work that we really felt like God was calling us to do with them.
Right. So good.
Just make sure I don't miss anything up here. All right, I'm going to run down to the bottom now. I was telling someone yesterday, the way that all our comments come in, it's not easy to maneuver. Cassie, for question number 2, humble yourself to all, realize your sinfulness and understand your limitations. Humility is not self-degradation. It is a realistic self-assessment and commitment to serve all. Yeah. Yep. Cool. And then, nope, already read that one. Okay. Did I miss anything, Kendall?
Cassie had a question here. Now they're jumping around so much I might have lost it. Wait. There we go. Oh no.
I think is it this one?
Yes, there you go.
Okay. So Cassie, here's your question. Is it difficult when people believe that God is one who just starts wars and causes pain? How does one respond to someone who feels this way?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of things, like that's the question we asked up top with, you know, where's God in this current cultural situation? Because people would say, oh, I see God. He's the one that's causing all the pain. He's starting the wars. He's in control. Why doesn't he take some control? And I think Jenny had said here, I've been told that God doesn't cause this, evil does. Which is true, but that's still, it's because of out of the brokenness of our world, out of the brokenness of us as human beings. If we would turn towards God, if we would all be following God, if we would be working together, we would see those things go away. And you know, while God has control, He also gives us choice to make those poor decisions, to allow evil, you know, into our lives and into our hearts and into the hearts of people, and these things come about. But that's a huge sticking and hanging point for people. It's one of the things that you know, a ways down the road, I always think about what we're talking about in the future. We're going to talk about our Bibles. We're going to talk about some apologetics, and those are the kind of questions that people ask. Like, why does a good God allow all this evil and mess in this world? It's a sticking point and a hanging point for people who are not sure if they want to be a part of this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Why would you follow a God that would allow these things to happen?
Yep, right.
Or, and even when we don't understand fully, that makes these things happen. And remember, it is the brokenness in our world that causes these things. It's not God just kind of raining down on us, which would put us in that position of being under God, feeling like he's just a heavy thumb, just waiting for you to mess up so that he can hurt you and cause destruction in the world around you. That's not the God that we serve. But because of human sin and brokenness, man, we suffer because of all of that. Yeah, that's good. Eileen here says for number 5, when we when we fail to have peace. No, that's yesterday. When we fail to have humility with others, what does it reveal about our relationship with God? She says, we don't know and believe who we truly are in Christ. If we did, we wouldn't keep idolizing empty things like money, power, fame to prove our worth. We would feel completely filled with God's love and wholly accepted, and our need to prove would be replaced with an acknowledgement that we deserve nothing and a desire to humble ourselves and serve others in a way that honors God. Yeah. Can you imagine if people lived that way?
Right.
It's just a different world.
Yeah. It's so good.
And then Sherry here says, I was thinking about your example of Christ, how he went through all that injustice and undeserving anger, and his response was humility. I know I often respond in those situations with that most acceptable emotion of anger instead of humility. What a great example of how I should respond. And that is just not innate in us. We want to feel justified in our anger and our bitterness, in all of those things, instead of remembering this is part of being in relationship. First of all, I think yesterday, Kendall, we talked a little bit about our staff value of assuming the best in others. How can we, you have to put yourself in a place of humility to be able to accept and feel humble before others to assume the best.
Right. For sure.
That's good. All right. Well, I'm going to close us up here. Like Kendall said, today is Marketplace. And so this is just an awesome opportunity that we have to really serve our community and meet our community right where they are. So if this is something that you want to follow along with and get involved in, you can follow us on our socials at For Aurora. And then if you have questions or want to know how to get involved, you can email fораurora@ehills.org. Tomorrow, Kendall will update us on how many families were able to participate today. It's always amazing. If you just want to drive by the church today and roll down your window and just take a big sniff, I'm sure you'll smell whatever amazing food they're cooking to be able to serve our community. But it's such an awesome thing. And then again, tonight at 8 p.m. on the online class Facebook page for Eastern Hills, we'll have our online class. Dustin and I are going to talk about the woman at the well. And I'll probably just get all kinds of excited about that story because it's just such a great example of how Jesus is amazing and loves people right where they are and accepts them right as they are.
Good.
All right. So I'm hopping down to those prayer requests. I just want to make sure I read this first before we jump in because I want to make sure I pray for what we're looking for here. This was Carol's prayer request up front, Kendall. Please pray for my family as we lost my husband's 30-year-old daughter yesterday afternoon. So Jordan had a lot of issues. And then she says valley fever and an autoimmune disease. She was admitted into the hospital Sunday night. They removed her gallbladder yesterday and she never woke up. Tom lost a 22-year-old son 4 years ago in a motorcycle accident. I can't imagine his pain right now. Please pray for him. Jordan was living in Phoenix with her mom and 11-year-old son, Damari. We can take comfort in knowing that she was a believer and is home with our Lord and not in pain, but it's still a shock. Absolutely, Carol. We will definitely be lifting up your family. And then Sarah, wanting to know whether God wants her to go ahead and have surgery for her neck and back, or just trust him. So we will pray for that. And thank you all for trusting us with your prayers. It is such an honor and a privilege that we get to do that. So
one more from Jenny there at the end of the comments.
Oh yeah. Yep. And I see Megan has one too.
Oh, yep. Sorry, I missed that one.
Yep. So I'll remember. I've got those here on this screen. I've got the other ones over here. All right. God, man, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you that we can kind of wrestle and struggle through difficult concepts, things that are that go against the way that our humanity pulls us. God, I pray that as we continue to do the heavy lifting and the hard work here, that you would bring this conversation back to the forefront of our minds and our hearts, that we would remember that approaching others with humility is honoring to you. I pray that as we go through today, that you would help us as we are journaling and reflecting and continuing to remember what it looks like to be humble and to give humility to others, that people would notice that, not to boost ourselves up or anything like that, but that they would start seeing more and more of you in what we were reflecting, and that they would recognize that there is something different because you are a part of our lives. We continue to pray for the coronavirus situation that is all around us as some communities are shutting down again, that as cases are on the rise, that we would just be aware of what's going on, but that we would not live in fear. God, that you would remind us that you do have a plan and a purpose, even for this, which feels weird to even say, but you do. And God, help us to trust you in that. We lift up our medical people that are working on cures and vaccines. God, that you would just give them wisdom as they do that, that they would have the resources that they need and even the creativity in their minds to think outside of what is obvious. God, I pray that you would be with our community as we are just continuing to live in response to the situations and the circumstances, that you would just protect our community. And God, that you would give Eastern Hills opportunities to be that light and just shine that light into Southeast Aurora and the surrounding communities. We specifically pray for Tom today and for Carol as they have lost another child. God, we just pray that you would bring peace to Tom's heart, that you would help him navigate through the loss of his daughter. And as this will resurface feelings from the loss that he felt 4 years ago, that you would just be his comforter, that you would give Carol the right words to say, and even just the ability to sit in silence and sit with her husband. God, that you would just protect their marriage, that you would protect the rest of their family. And God, that you would just be in every single moment. We thank you that Jordan is at peace right now, that she is with you in your arms, but God, she is missed here on earth. And so we just pray that you would be all around these moments in this situation. And God, I ask that you would also be with Sarah, that you would give her wisdom as she is trying to figure out, should she go in for the surgery, or do you want her just to be trusting you? You are good and you answer these prayers. And so God, we just ask that you would help her navigate through this and to hear from you, and not let her own heart's desires get in the way of that. And for Megan, with Owen, the little neighbor next door, God, that you would just continue to be in this whole situation. His test results are supposed to come back today. And God, we are praying that it with Megan's family and her children that have been around this little guy, and God, that it would not affect plans that they have had, and that you would just bring healing to his body as well. God, and for Jenny's family, for Brooke, as they are heading to Seattle tomorrow. God, I just pray that you would be with both of them. Jenny is still hobbling along with her crutches. And so I just pray that she would be able to find the right parking spot, and that she would just be in that whole situation, protect them, and just allow them to have a great time together as a family. And for Cassie, as her back is really starting to bother her again, just bring healing to her. She is going in for injections tomorrow, which comes with its own set of unsettling. And God, we just ask that you would be with her in all of that, and those injections would help. God, we just lift all of these prayers to you in Jesus' name, and we thank you for who you are and the model that you have given us. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, all right, everyone. Closing up shop for today. We'll see you back here tomorrow. We are going to do our final day of accept, and we're going to close it out, Kendall, with kindness and compassion.
Cool.
So we'll see you tomorrow morning.
See you tomorrow.